Melania Trump's documentary just suffered what sources are calling one of the most humiliating theatrical releases in cinema history, and the fallout might reveal how completely the Trump brand has collapsed, even among people who should theoretically be their audience. We're not talking about poor reviews or disappointing box office. We're talking about reports that an entire nation, South Africa, abruptly canceled the film's theatrical release, citing concerns about how Trump administration's increasingly harsh immigration tactics would affect reception. That Melania had to have New York Stock Exchange staff literally coached to clap louder during her bell-ringing ceremony because organic enthusiasm was so lacking. And sources suggest what might make this moment so significant is the timing. While Trump's ICE operations generate international revulsion after killings of Alex Prey and Renee Good, while his Epstein file cover-up continues outraging Americans, while his approval ratings crater, his wife is trying to launch vanity documentary comparing herself to Rolling Stones and Michael Jackson. When entire countries are canceling your movie because your husband's policies are too toxic, when stock exchange employees need prompting to generate applause, that's not just bad publicity, that might be terminal brand collapse where association with Trump name has become so poisonous that even $40 million from Jeff Bezos can't make project viable. But before we break down everything, please subscribe to our channel, John Brown Show. Your subscription actually matters here. All right, let's get into what South Africa's cancellation reveals and why sources suggest it represents something bigger than just one country rejecting one film. Because the official explanation allegedly wasn't about quality or market demand. Reports indicate concerns were raised about how the documentary would be received by viewers given the Trump administration's increasingly harsh immigration tactics. That's diplomatic language for what might be blunt reality. Association with Trump has become so toxic internationally that countries don't want his family's propaganda in their theaters.
Amazon is giving $40 million direct cash into the pockets of the Trump family. Melania's agent has been trying to sell sponsorships for the film and billionaires who were at the inauguration. In return for your sponsorship of this Melania documentary, buyers would get thanked at the end of the credits and be invited to the premiere.
And when you combine that with reports that stock exchange staff needed coaching to generate applause, that Amazon paid $40 million essentially as bribe to Trump family rather than expecting actual commercial success, that Melania's agent was trying to sell $10 million sponsorships to CEOs desperate for access, a pattern emerges. This documentary isn't cultural product. Sources suggest it's money laundering scheme where billionaires pay Trump family through various mechanisms while pretending there's legitimate business justification. And the South Africa cancellation proves even that pretense can't be sustained internationally. When your movie gets canceled by entire nations specifically because of your husband's human rights abuses, that's not political disagreement. That might be world recognizing American administration as pariah state. Let's start with what happened at the New York Stock Exchange when Melania rang the opening bell to celebrate her documentary. Because sources suggest what was supposed to be triumphant moment became public humiliation when organic enthusiasm failed to materialize. Reports indicate New York Stock Exchange President Lynn Martin had to visibly gesture to crowd of staff and guests, prompting them to increase their applause. The moment was captured on live television, including CNBC and Fox Business. Networks Trump watches obsessively. Think about what that reveals. This wasn't subtle prompting. Sources suggest Martin was scanning crowd, visibly dissatisfied with response, and had to gesture to ramp up cheers. That desperation to generate artificial enthusiasm was broadcast live for Trump to see, when even stock exchange employees who presumably understand value of staying on Trump's good side can't muster genuine excitement without prompting. That indicates how thoroughly his brand has collapsed, and the awkwardness allegedly continued after bell ringing. Reports suggest Melania fumbled awkward hang hug with Martin and did forced high fives and selfies that looked more like hostage situation than celebration. When someone who's supposedly promoting major cultural event can't generate natural enthusiasm or comfortable interactions, that's not just personal awkwardness. That might be recognition by everyone involved that this is charade nobody actually believes in. But sources indicate there's specific irony in the venue. The person Melania high-fived was Jeffrey Sprecher, CEO of ICE, the company, Intercontinental Exchange that owns New York Stock Exchange. Different entity from Immigration and Customs Enforcement, but same acronym as agency that's helped plunge Melania's husband into political crisis, according to reports. When you're celebrating documentary at venue run by person whose company shares name with agency, destroying your husband's approval ratings, that's either tone-deaf scheduling or deliberate attempt to confuse the associations. And Melania's speech reportedly compared her documentary's cultural impact to Rolling Stones and Michael Jackson. Sources suggest she said people want stories that inspire dreams, and we want to feel human. That last phrase, we want to feel human, allegedly sounded so robotic that it reinforced, rather than contradicted, perception of Melania as artificial construct. When someone trying to seem relatable says things that make them seem less human, that's failure of basic communication that no amount of coaching can fix. Make sure you're subscribed to John Brown Show because there's reportedly another element. New York Stock Exchange gave Melania commemorative plate. That's the prize for ringing bell. Not cultural impact, not box office success. A plate. When your documentary launch celebration's highlight is receiving ceremonial dishware while staff need prompting to clap, that might reveal how little substance underlies the entire project. This isn't artistic achievement being celebrated. This is access buying dressed up as cultural event. But the stock exchange awkwardness pales compared to what happened next. Sources indicate South Africa's distributor Filmfinity abruptly canceled theatrical release of Melania's documentary entirely, not just reduced screens or delayed timing. Complete cancellation despite film having already passed country's classification and regulatory approval. Reports suggest decision came after concerns were raised about how the documentary would be received by viewers given Trump administration's increasingly harsh immigration tactics. Think about what that language means. South African distributor isn't saying film lacks quality or commercial appeal. They're allegedly saying Trump administration's human rights abuses make releasing his wife's propaganda too controversial. That's extraordinary admission. When foreign country cancels film specifically because they don't want association with American president's policies, that's international repudiation of administration's legitimacy. And the timing reportedly matters. The cancellation came after federal immigration officers shot and killed Renee Good and Alex Prey in Minneapolis. After images of terrorized immigrant communities spread globally. After reports of people being detained without proper process, flown to Texas, and dumped without resources. Sources suggest South Africa looked at those images and decided they couldn't be party to normalizing administration responsible for that conduct. That they wouldn't help Trump family profit from documentary while Trump's ICE terrorizes communities. But there's allegedly particular significance to South Africa specifically rejecting this film. Country with history of apartheid and systematic oppression, recognizing parallels to Trump's tactics. Nation that underwent truth and reconciliation process, understanding importance of not normalizing authoritarian abuse. Sources indicate when South Africa, of all countries, says your immigration enforcement is too harsh to be associated with, that's damning international judgment about how far America has fallen. And reports suggest this might just be beginning. If South Africa canceled based on immigration tactics, other countries might follow. Distributors in nations with significant immigrant populations might calculate that releasing film praising Trump family creates public relations disaster. Sources indicate each cancellation becomes news that generates more bad publicity, creating cycle where film becomes increasingly untouchable internationally. That's terminal failure for project that was supposed to boost Trump brand globally. Share this video with everyone you know because there's reportedly another dimension. The $40 million Amazon paid Trump family for this documentary. That money already transferred regardless of whether anyone actually watches film. Sources suggest Jeff Bezos essentially bought access and favorable treatment through payment disguised as licensing fee for content that might never reach significant audience. When billionaires pay tens of millions for propaganda, nobody wants to distribute or watch. That's not business transaction. That might be corruption laundered through entertainment industry. But let's talk about what Jeff Bezos' role reveals about billionaire class's complete capitulation to Trump despite his unpopularity. Because sources suggest Amazon paying $40 million for Melania documentary wasn't about expecting commercial success. Reports indicate it was protection money. Bezos allegedly calculated that spending roughly $75 million across various Trump-related projects buys favorable treatment for his much more profitable companies, and he's willing to corrupt both Amazon Prime and Washington Post to achieve that goal. Think about what that means for media integrity. Amazon Prime isn't just streaming service, it's a platform that influences culture by deciding what content reaches audiences. When Bezos uses that platform to distribute Trump family propaganda as favor to president, he's weaponizing media asset for political purposes. Sources suggest this is exactly what happens when billionaires control essential communications infrastructure. They use it to serve their own interests rather than public good. And there's reportedly similar corruption at Washington Post. Bezos allegedly uses newspaper to satisfy Trump while gutting its ability to hold administration accountable. When owners' business interests require keeping president happy, editorial independence becomes impossible. That's why Post might not aggressively cover stories that would anger Trump, why critical coverage gets softened, why investigative projects that would expose corruption might not get resourced. The corruption is structural because owners' incentives are misaligned with journalism's purpose. But sources suggest there's particular cynicism to using these specific properties. Amazon Prime reaches millions of Americans who might not realize they're being fed propaganda. Washington Post has reputation for serious journalism that Bezos trades on while undermining its mission. When billionaire perverts media institutions that Americans depend on for information and entertainment, he's not just serving his business interests. He might be destroying democratic discourse's foundation. And reports indicate other billionaires following same playbook. Melania's agent allegedly tried selling $10 million sponsorships to CEOs who attended inauguration. For that price, you get thanked in credits and invited to premiere. That's not normal film financing. That's selling access dressed up as entertainment investment. Sources suggest wealthy people who want favorable treatment from Trump administration can buy it through supporting families' vanity projects. Each payment creates obligation that shapes how Trump wields presidential power. Trump interests are allegedly pitching Hollywood for show about Don Jr.'s hunting, not because anyone wants to watch Don Jr. shoot animals, but because entertainment deals create vehicles for funneling money to Trump family while maintaining veneer of legitimacy. When billionaires and corporations need access, they fund these projects. The Trumps get money, the funders get influence, and Americans lose because their government gets sold to highest bidders. But Bezos' capitulation has consequences beyond just funding propaganda. Sources indicate Trump administration is now targeting Washington Post journalists with aggressive tactics that would have been unthinkable without Bezos' signal that he won't protect his own staff. Reports suggest FBI executed search warrant at Post journalist's home, seizing her phone, 2 laptops including Post-issued computer, and even her watch. This is allegedly retaliation dressed as legitimate investigation. Think about what that means for press freedom. The claim justification is investigation into government contractor who allegedly had classified materials, but reports indicate the contractor isn't accused of leaking, just of retaining documents improperly. Yet DOJ used that as pretext to raid journalist's home and seize her work materials. That's not legitimate national security investigation. Sources suggest that's intimidation designed to chill reporting on government misconduct. And there's legal framework that's supposed to prevent exactly this. Reports indicate 1980 law bans searching reporters' homes unless they're suspects in criminal probe. But Trump administration allegedly diluted those protections shortly after taking office. They telegraphed their intent to target journalists, and nobody stopped them because billionaire owners like Bezos aren't willing to fight back. When your boss won't defend you, when corporate interests require staying in Trump's good graces, journalists become vulnerable to prosecution. But sources suggest there's particular significance to timing and target. This raid came after Trump's ICE operations generated international condemnation, after his Epstein cover-up became major scandal. after multiple judges found his administration in contempt. When President faces mounting accountability pressure, he lashes out at journalists documenting his abuses. And he can do that because Bezos has signaled through $40 million payment and Washington Post's editorial softening that he won't resist Trump's attacks on press freedom. And reports indicate this might just be beginning. If Trump successfully intimidates one Washington Post journalist without consequences, he'll target others. Other news organizations might face similar raids. Sources suggest pattern could spread where any journalist who reports unfavorably on administration becomes potential target for investigation using pretextual justifications. That's how authoritarians destroy free press. Not by shutting down newspapers directly, by making journalism so legally dangerous that people stop doing it. Looking closely, there's reportedly lesson about billionaire ownership of media. When Bezos faces choice between defending his journalists and protecting his business interests, he chooses business. That's not unique to him. That's a structural problem with billionaires owning newspapers and streaming services. Their wealth creates conflicts of interest that inevitably corrupt editorial independence. Sources suggest only solution might be breaking up these media monopolies and ensuring journalistic institutions aren't controlled by people who need favors from government. But there's reportedly another reason Melania's documentary is failing beyond just international toxicity. Sources suggest MAGA audience fundamentally can't engage with even moderately thoughtful content. They respond to Trump rallies and conspiracy theories, but can't sustain attention for documentary that requires any critical thinking. That creates impossible dilemma for Trump family trying to monetize their brand through entertainment. Think about what type of content MAGA consumes. Fox News opinion shows that validate existing beliefs. Social media posts that trigger emotional reactions. Trump rallies where chanting replaces thinking. Sources suggest when you try creating documentary that requires sustained attention or analytical engagement, MAGA audience tunes out. They're not interested in Melania's life story. They're interested in permission to express racism and authoritarianism. Documentary about fashion and immigration views doesn't scratch that itch. And there's class dimension reports indicate Trump family doesn't grasp. Their supporters are people Trump and Melania fundamentally despise. Wealthy elites performing populism for working-class audience they privately mock. But that audience knows they're being conned at some level. Sources suggest they support Trump anyway because he gives them enemies to hate. But they're not going to pay to watch Melania's vanity documentary. They're not invested in her personal narrative. The relationship is transactional around shared bigotries, not genuine cultural connection. But sources indicate Trump family also can't attract mainstream audience. People who might watch well-made documentary are overwhelmingly opposed to Trump. They're not going to watch propaganda piece about his wife, regardless of production quality. That means Melania's film has no viable audience. MAGA won't engage with thoughtful content. Anti-Trump majority won't watch Trump family propaganda. You're left with tiny sliver of people who both support Trump and want to watch feature-length documentary about Melania. That's not sustainable market. And reports suggest this explains the billionaire sponsorship strategy. Since film can't succeed commercially, only path to profitability is getting wealthy people to pay inflated sums for access. Those $10 million sponsorships allegedly aren't about marketing or reaching audiences. They're about buying influence with Trump administration. The film becomes vehicle for legalized bribery where CEOs pay Trump family directly in exchange for favorable regulatory treatment or government contracts. The actual content becomes irrelevant if money comes from corruption rather than ticket sales. Trump and Melania want validation from cultural elites who've always rejected them. They want Hollywood and New York cultural establishment to treat them as legitimate. But that recognition will never come because those communities recognize the Trumps as fundamentally corrupt. So they create vanity projects like this documentary, invite billionaires to premieres, hold stock exchange ceremonies, all trying to manufacture legitimacy they can't earn. The South Africa cancellation reportedly proves that strategy is failing internationally, even as it might work domestically through sheer financial coercion. But step back and look at what this entire episode reveals about oligarch class and why sources suggest accountability matters more than incremental reform. Because Jeff Bezos didn't have to corrupt Amazon and Washington Post to serve Trump. He chose to do that because his business interests required it. And that choice demonstrates that billionaires will always prioritize profit over principle, which means any progressive agenda has to include breaking their power rather than trying to negotiate with them. Think about what we've learned. Bezos will fund Trump family propaganda. He'll abandon his own journalists when they're targeted. He'll use newspapers' reputation to shield corruption while gutting investigative capacity. Reports indicate other billionaires behave similarly. Tech CEOs attending inauguration, Wall Street executives buying influence through Trump properties, Hollywood studios making favorable content deals, all of them calculating that serving Trump protects their wealth even if it destroys democracy. But sources suggest the lesson is they'll serve whoever holds power if doing so protects their interests. Bezos bent to Trump not because of ideological alignment, but because Trump can hurt Amazon through regulation. That same dynamic would exist with progressive president willing to use power. If Democrats threaten to break up monopolies, investigate tax avoidance, or regulate labor practices unless billionaires complied with demands, they'd comply. The capitulation to Trump proves they're fundamentally cowards who will accommodate any power that threatens them. And that means progressive strategy shouldn't be tiptoeing around billionaire sensitivities. Reports indicate it should be using government power to break monopolies, prosecute corruption, and redistribute wealth concentrated through exploitation. Sources suggest billionaires fear that agenda because it threatens their power, which is exactly why it needs to happen. The oligarch class that enabled Trump's rise through media capitulation and political funding must face consequences that prevent them from enabling future authoritarians. But there's reportedly also lesson about who Democrats should target politically. Not the diminishing Republican base that enjoys cruelty, but the millions of Americans who don't vote because they correctly recognize politics is broken and corrupt. Sources indicate when you break up monopolies, prosecute billionaire corruption, and deliver material benefits to working people, you activate constituencies that have been alienated from political participation. That strategy builds power rather than trying to win over MAGA voters who are fundamentally unreachable. Multiple sources suggest South Africa's cancellation provides proof of concept. When nation takes principled stand against Trump administration's abuses, it inspires others to follow. If more countries cancel Melania's documentary, if more distributors refuse to carry Trump family content, if international community makes clear that association with this administration carries costs, that isolation weakens Trump politically, and if Democrats learn that lesson about using power rather than seeking accommodation, they could apply same principles domestically to break oligarch control that enabled Trump. So what actually happens now with Melania's documentary and the broader pattern of billionaire capitulation it represents? Because sources suggest several scenarios depending on whether more countries follow South Africa's lead and whether Democrats recognize implications for how to wield power. Reports indicate if additional nations cancel theatrical releases, Melania's film becomes international embarrassment that can't be hidden through friendly media coverage. Each cancellation generates news documenting Trump brand's toxicity, and that international rejection might influence domestic reception. Sources suggest if world views Trump as pariah, Americans might question why they're supposed to celebrate his family. Cultural critics might feel empowered to pan documentary without fear of backlash. Even friendly outlets might struggle to generate positive coverage when international consensus is that film represents toxic brand nobody wants associated with. That could turn what was supposed to be prestige project into humiliation Trump can't spin away. But there's reportedly also question of whether raid on Washington Post journalists generates sufficient backlash to force Bezos to choose between protecting his staff and maintaining Trump's favor. If journalist community mobilizes around this as unacceptable assault on press freedom, if public outcry makes Bezos's position untenable, he might have to defend his own employees or face complete loss of credibility. Sources suggest that could establish precedent that Trump's attacks on press have consequences, rather than being cost-free intimidation. And there's broader question about midterm implications. Trump's approval continues cratering as his policies generate horror. Melania's documentary failure becomes another symbol of administration's toxicity. International community's rejection provides validation for Americans who oppose him. Reports indicate if Democrats effectively campaign on accountability, on breaking billionaire power, on prosecuting corruption that enabled Trump, they could channel disgust into electoral wave. That would give them power to actually implement reforms rather than just resisting. But sources suggest there's also risk that billionaire class responds to electoral threat by doubling down on supporting Trump. If they calculate that Democratic victory would mean prosecution and wealth redistribution, they might spend unlimited sums trying to maintain Republican control. That creates a scenario where 2026 midterms become existential battle between oligarchs trying to preserve power and majority trying to reclaim democracy from their control. Stakes couldn't be higher. There's reportedly also question of international coalitions. If South Africa's cancellation inspires other nations to isolate Trump administration, if economic pressure combines with diplomatic rejection, if international community makes clear that American authoritarianism has consequences, that external pressure could constrain Trump's worst impulses. Sources suggest authoritarian governments typically care about international legitimacy even when they ignore domestic opposition. Coalition of democracies refusing to normalize Trump might force changes that internal resistance alone couldn't achieve. So here's what Melania's documentary disaster reveals about Trump family's brand collapse and billionaire capitulation that enabled it. An entire nation canceled theatrical release citing concerns about administration's increasingly harsh immigration tactics. Stock exchange staff needed coaching to generate applause at bell-ringing ceremony. Amazon paid $40 million essentially as bribe rather than commercial investment. And Melania compared herself to Rolling Stones while sounding like robot, saying, "We want to feel human." The South Africa cancellation matters because it proves international community recognizing Trump administration as pariah. When foreign countries won't distribute propaganda because they don't want association with your human rights abuses, that's judgment on legitimacy that can't be dismissed as partisan politics. Each additional cancellation reinforces that judgment and makes Trump brand more toxic globally. But underlying problem is billionaire class enabling this through capitulation. Jeff Bezos corrupting Amazon and Washington Post to serve Trump. Other oligarchs buying influence through entertainment deals and sponsorships. All of them calculating that protecting business interests requires accommodating authoritarian, regardless of cost to democracy. That pattern must be broken through prosecutions, monopoly breakups, and wealth redistribution, or it will enable future authoritarians just as it enabled Trump. The lesson for Democrats is they shouldn't negotiate with billionaires who prove they'll serve anyone threatening their profits. They should use government power to break oligarch control, just as billionaires would bend to that power just as readily as they bent to Trump. The capitulation proves they're cowards who respect force, which means progressive agenda should be maximalist rather than incremental. For Americans watching this unfold, the humiliation provides satisfaction but also reminder of stakes. Trump made everything worse, and even his wife's vanity projects become international embarrassments. But oligarchs like Bezos are still funding the destruction while abandoning journalists and corrupting institutions. That requires accountability extending beyond Trump himself to everyone who enabled his rise through their cowardice and greed. Without that comprehensive accounting, pattern repeats with next authoritarian oligarchs decide to support. Stay tuned.